Richie, thanks for joining us today here at the Australian Music Vault.
No worries, nice to be here.
As far as dance music in Australia is concerned, you are considered one of the country's longest running and most successful dance and electronic promoters. You're a forerunner of the dance music scene, and you've also been an influential and prominent DJ figure, an agent of change working with the Victorian government to help make dance events safer events. And you're also an entrepreneur, having established well-known brands such as Hardware, Pure Music Company, Stereosonic, Two Tribes, and your latest venture, Festival X. There is much to unpack here, Richie, and your accomplishments are really remarkable. But I want to go back to where it all began for a boy of fairly working-class parents who was brought up in Melbourne's eastern suburbs. In 1971. Tell me about how and where you grew up.
I was born in Preston. I have a large Maltese background family out that way. And then spent a bit of time in Bowen. Went to Deep Dean Primary, lived with my grandparents for a little while when my mum and dad separated. And then my mum remarried my current father, Kevin, and we grew up out in the east in sort of North Blackburn, East Doncaster. Used to, hang out at Box Hill Central and Donny Shopping Town, and used to go to hot tracks out there in club out there, and worked at McDonald's like my other two sisters. We had about 10 years of McDonald's family working out in Doncaster. So in the 80s, it was great.
So what's your earliest musical memory?
My parents used to listen to, like my dad used to listen to ELO and Moody Blues and some really cool sort of 70s stuff, and he used to listen to a lot of music and torture us with like Little River Band when we used to drive to Queensland on Boxing Day for 2 days in the car. And then the tape deck Sony Walkman came out. It was like a yellow waterproof one, and that was revolutionary because I used to be able to listen to my own music on the way to Queensland for 20 hours in the car. But I mean, as a kid, like electronic music wise, a friend of mine at primary school lived in the street next to the Bowen Cinema, and we used to sit on the steps during school holidays and listen to the films at the back, the fire exit up the stairs, and because it was quite loud, and you'd hear the soundtracks, and it was actually Jean-Michel Jarre's Oxygen track, which was from the Gallipoli, the Mel Gibson film Gallipoli, that kind of got my ear and got me into sort of sci-fi and electronic music, and that was sort of the first kind of real electronic music trigger that I had. But yeah, I had two older sisters, 5 years apart, and basically, they were listening to Split Enz and Goanna and In Excess and all those sorts of things. So I had a lot of music just sort of presented to me from all different backgrounds, from a very music-loving family. I think was probably the main influence. I was doing year 12 in '89, and I was going out to clubs a lot, listening to, Acid House had just sort of come in, and I was into things like The Cure and New Order and Depeche Mode that were sort of going that way. And Madonna and all these sorts of artists were, getting dance producers to produce their records, and everything was getting dancier in sort of '88 and '89.
Well, you mentioned Acid House, a genre of music from Chicago that really, I guess, had an impact here in Melbourne at the time. Talk me through the impact that it had on you personally when you were going to those shows and raves underage.
Well, I used to go to Talk H with some kids from some friends from school, and through the end of year 11 and year 12, when that sort of Acid House explosion came, like the first time I heard it, I was just like, what the hell is this? And just wanted more of it. And a friend of mine, Jay Snipe, had a friend who was friends with a DJ called Steve Robbins, and Steve would sneak us into Checkpoint Charlie. We used to go there, and we'd sneak in through the back door and sort of sit in the DJ booth because we weren't allowed to sort of go out on the floor because we were underage. So we'd sort of be hidden in the corner, and having that kind of experience of sort of sitting in the back corner of the DJ booth and seeing the DJ play and everything that was being played was just, that was probably the thing that really inspired me to be a DJ, but also exposed me to the music to just sort of buy more and more. So I used to go to Central Station on school holidays and whenever I could, and just get as much listen to as much of the music there as I could. But the problem was a lot of the stuff that was on the shelves was sort of leftovers. All the good stuff was always snapped up on the shipment days. So I used to listen to, there was a guy called, I think it was Con Delita, DJC was his name, that had a show on PBS on Saturday nights that I would used to listen to while I was studying on Saturday nights. And he played a bit of hip hop, hip house, and house music and acid house. And so, witnessing what Steve was doing and sneaking into these clubs and listening to DJC on Saturday nights, it was just a really short period of time that all of a sudden, forget it, all the other music like In Excess and all The Cure and all the other things I was into. It was just like, listen to this stuff as much as I can. And so I started like recording the Saturday night shows and editing out the hip hop bits and taking the electronic bits and making like my own sort of compilations. And then I worked at a pizza shop in East Doncaster called Peppercorn Pizza. And there was it was a family business, and the three brothers and the sister, the youngest brother, had turntables. And on school holidays and sometimes on the weekends, I'd go over to Tony's house, and in the basement of the house in East Doncaster, they lived, somewhere in Templestowe. He lived in the basement, and he had this turntable set up with all these records in crates. I was like, oh, this is unreal. So it was the first time that I actually got to play on 1200 turntables, because at Checkpoint Charlie, when you're 17 or 18, I wasn't allowed, I was just watching Steve. So, just scratching and like feeling what it was doing to the music and everything. I just, I had to get a pair of turntables. So, and Steve and Tony actually taught me a few things and showed, I could actually see up close because, what the pitch control was doing and how he was using the headphones to mix the music and everything. So I went to Tandy and bought a little BVL mixer, and I had a belt-driven turntable, and it was really hard because it was belt-driven to scratch anything, and the needles weren't made for that kind of activity. So I had to put a slip mat and the plastic film from a record, and kind of just started to teach myself to kind of, mix music, and had a tape deck set up and started making these really bad mixtapes that was, tape music and belt-driven turntable records kind of mixed together, and it was more just cutting and fading and things. And then, just from there, I just went straight on into it and kind of spent less time doing homework and focusing on school and more time on that, and going to underage discos. And that's how it all kind of started.
You started DJing under the moniker Richie Rich. Talk me through actually getting those DJ gigs in Melbourne.
Well, actually, the first name that I had, which was only for a very short pace of time, was Mr. Rubbish. And I was rubbish at the time, I think. And then I was literally I met a chap called David Carboni, who runs a school of synthesis here, and he was part of FSOM with Josh Abrahams.
Which is Future Sound of Melbourne?
Future Sound of Melbourne, yeah, it was pre-FSOM. So I met, and he was friends with Steve Robbins, and I met him through Steve, and they were doing a Wednesday night radio show on Triple R called Rhythmatic. And that show was very upfront, where DJC was a bit more broad. They were just like underground house and techno and rave sort of thing. And then I met Dave, through Steve, and we got along. And he said, I'm going to start a record store. And it was from a house on just opposite the Coles Mire up in Taronga Village on Toorak Road. It was called Rhythm Records. And we started a record store from the front of this gentleman's house. And it might sound pretty crazy because it was a bit out of the way of the sort of South Yarra, Chapel Street sort of area where Mighty Music and most of the record stores were, or the city. But we literally knew enough DJs, and we had some upfront music coming from a store called City Sounds in London, that we actually had different music that no one else could get. And so, DJs like John Corse and Steve Robbins and these sorts of people would come to Rhythm Records and once a week, and we'd get shipments in every week and buy this incredible music. We created a few waves, and Central Station were, sending spies in to sort of see what we were doing, and I was getting access to some amazing records. And then Dave went over to the UK and shored up some more contacts, and then from there, I started DJing at the back of the Palace for Mark James, and Paul O'Loughlin, that had a nightclub called Dream at the time. He was just about to open, and it was called Pure, and it was at the back of the Palace. there was many nights in Melbourne that would do, at Zuzu's and in Greville Street, IDs upstairs, and there was lots of different little nights that were happening in various venues. But basically, this was kind of the first club that kind of took that sort of more club underground rave scene into the first kind of like mega rave type sort of era, which was a real kind of explosion that happened. And fortunately, it was myself and Willie Tell and Steve Robbins and Mark James, and I was fortunate enough to be, part of that team. And at the time, there was probably one of the most underrated, influential people in Melbourne. Kate Bathgate was doing a Friday night show called Transmission, which was on Friday nights on Triple R. And that particular show, you had all these other shows on, like Rhythmatic on Wednesdays and DJC's show on PBS on Saturday. But that show, because it was at the start of the weekend, had such an audience of Melbourne from Dandenong all the way out to Werribee to, as far north as you could go, down the peninsula. Like, it was such a pulling together of the whole culture and the whole scene and everything, with Mad Rod, who used to do Filter on Wednesdays at the Lounge. He would do a weekend wrap-up of what's on this weekend. Every international that would come in, whether it was Underground Resistance or Derek May or Thomas Ekman or Kevin Saunderson from Inner City, they'd always go into Kate's show on Fridays and do a guest mix, and it just became the start of the week. Listen to the Kate show and find out what was going on that weekend.
In the music scene globally, grunge was happening and exploding, and guitar music was massive, and yet in this little pocket, in this little corner, rave, trance and dance was really taking over, and Kate Bathgate was a real leading light. And I have memories of people listening in the car park of the Palace to Kate's show, and they weren't going into the raves that were currently on because they wanted to listen to her music right until the till the show ended, and then they would go and dance. But she had such a way of talking to Melbourne, and it was like, it's going off, Melbourne, under
her voice was
145 BPMs, it's going off, it's coming. And you really couldn't help but get swept by this wonderful leading light of this dance music. And I
definitely.
think people like that at the time were, have kind of been probably omitted, sadly, from the dance music culture history.
Yeah, well, I mean, I used to dislike doing the first playing before 12 o'clock at the Palace at Pure on Fridays, because in the car, everyone would be in the car park, in their cars out the front, out the back of the Palace in the car park there, listening to the radio show with the windows down before they go in, so it wouldn't get busy until 12:30. Like, you'd have a massive line out the front at 12, but you'd have the car park full by 10:30, and everyone was just with their windows down, all listening to Triple R. Like,
the rave was in the car park.
It was. She was a real unsung hero, and such a massive influence. And then when I met Kate, I started actually, also because of Rhythm Records and my access to music, I actually started going in and helping provide Kate with music and do some of the programming, and also going there as a guest DJ and mixing music like every second or third week. And that was sort of part of my calendar of things to do. And she was a real influence and a real great help to me as a DJ and as a promoter, supporting our events, because our music and what she liked, we were on exactly the same kind of wavelength. She was very broad-minded in the music, that she liked all dance music, from drum and bass and jungle to house to whatever, but the stuff that we were particularly passionate about, she was really passionate about as well. And then from there, after, from that, I basically, was playing everywhere. Like, there was Emmy and Mark that from Brunswick Street, or just off Brunswick Street in Fitzroy, that had Ride on One Productions, and they were an English couple that came out in 1990, I think it was, and literally were finding these great locations. And the first event they did was called Quadrant, and it was in a communist club in North Melbourne, just around the corner from where I was living near Flagstaff Gardens. And it was illegal. Like, it was legal in they'd paid money to hire the venue and stuff, but I don't think they had the liquor license, the venue owners at the time or whatever. And I was playing, and then Ollie Olsen came on after me, and it was like 6 a.m. or 6:30, and the police came in and said, "What's going on?" And had Mark locked up in the toilets. He had his pockets full of cash because there was no tap and go or PayWave or credit card back then. So all the money on the door you would take not from pre-sale tickets was cash. And Mark had security, but, it was kind of like his first rave in Melbourne, and it was kind of like, what do I do with the money? So he had it all in his pocket. When the cops came, they bailed him up and he went and hid in the toilet, and they thought he was a drug dealer because he had his pockets full of cash, but it was actually the $2,000 from the door money that he kept in his pocket because he needed to pay all of us, the DJ and the lighting guy and everybody else. So, they searched him and didn't find anything. I was like, I'm going to hang around and sort of see what happens, because I was interested in promoting at the time, and I'd run a club night, but I was interested in doing more, events as opposed to running sort of like a weekly club night. And, everything, we all sort of dissipated and everything went away. And they did more and more events in great locations. They used the Comedy Club in Collingwood for one. They used the Polly Woodside for an event called Flotation. They used those under the train lines, the tunnels, which are now gyms, Banana Alley vaults. And I remember playing Underground Resistance, Seawolf, and the strobe light. The smoke was just a strobe light. 2 moving lights and basically a lot of smoke, and it was just this tunnel with like 300 people in it going completely crazy. I'm sure it was overcrowded. It was only allowed 50 people. There was 300 people in there. It was packed. It's just a strobe light going, smoke machine, playing like really tough, hard, Detroit to techno. And I was like, oh, this is unreal. So I, at the time I was, I'd basically worked at Chasers the year before, and I, as part of my software engineering degree, which I didn't finish at Monash, I built a mailing list program as an assignment for school. And so when I was a bussy at Chasers, and I was also at Chevron for a while, I was writing down names and addresses of people that I would see regularly that go out all the time, and started my own sort of industry kind of mailing list. And so I had this newsletter that I created with some desktop publishing software on my PC called Interface. And when I did my first sort of club night, I had this database of 1,000 people, and would print the labels, and I'd get kids to come over for free tickets, and we'd sit there stuffing envelopes with flyers and a newsletter and all that sort of stuff. Because there was no email back then. There was no Facebook or no way to market to people except put posters up on walls, do poll posters around the place, which was highly illegal.
Which I understand you actually got arrested for postering. Did you have to go to court?
I went to court, actually, Magistrates Court, yep. That was in end of 90 or start of 91, for putting up illusion posters, which was the first club night I did. They were horrible posters, like really bad, and like fluoro green and purple. And I'd put them all over poles, and I didn't know it was, I didn't know it was illegal, but I also knew that it hadn't really been done before, so it was kind of on the cutting edge of not right. But I got the glue and went to South Yarra Station on Toorak Road and did 3 high by 20 across, and just sort of thought, did it in half an hour, like probably took way too long. And there was a street sweeper council guy going up and down and saw me do it, and waited till I finished and wrote the registration of my car down. And a couple of days later, I was at home. I was like 19. I was at home, and my mum said, oh, come out of your room. There's people at the door. And it was 2 council inspectors from Stonington giving me a ticket. And then I had to go to court, and basically the promoter or the owner of the venue, the Star Bar, Brian Matruda, did the right thing and took the rap, which was good of him, and taught me, valuable lesson in life. And I've been there a couple of times since for putting up poll posters, including 2 years ago, but I'm not going to do it anymore. I've learnt my lesson now.
Let's fast forward to how you start your job at MDS. Mushroom had a dance department, but it was importing records and wasn't really established as such. You come in there as a youngster, and you work under the tutelage of Scott Murphy, who's running the department. Talk me through how you established MDS as a real leading light in Australian dance music.
Yeah, well, Scott was the CEO, I think, and then Colin Daniels was the head of dance when I started. They used to come to the Pure at the back of the Palace and listen after Friday night work drinks. And I got to know them and asked them, could I have a job? And they just thought I was some young crazy kid and just went, nah, just sort of laughed at me. And then I said, I'll do anything. So I started in the warehouse a couple of days a week and set some box packing records. And then they basically, Colin went to a new music seminar in New York and said, do you want to take over my job for a week? Because I was DJing around the country at the time, and I was like taking every state was different. It's a bit like Europe, like Australia. Like, you've got such a big country that what's big in Adelaide is not necessarily big in Perth, and Melbourne had its sound and Sydney had its sound, and there was very different sounds in every city. And Adelaide and Melbourne were actually considered like the techno capitals of Australia. Adelaide had a great exponent called DJ HMC, who's now also got a moniker called Late Night Tough Guy. And his label mates from Juice and Dirty House Records, which was a really big Australian label that was massive overseas at the time. Like, I remember opening a Groove magazine in that we received. It was a German magazine at the time, and the 50 charts in the double page spread in the middle from Sven Vath and Carl Cox, almost 2 out of 3 charts had a HMC record in it at the time. He was like, he was blowing up massively. And so when I was at MDS and I would go interstate, you'd always go and crate dig at the local record store, because you'd always find gems that were big in Sydney that Melbourne DJs didn't have, and you're always looking for an edge, you know, trying to get music that other DJs in your city don't have. You want the freshest music and different stuff. And so I started building relationships with those store owners. And because I worked at MDS, I'd write down some track names of some things that they had that we didn't have, and come back and give them to Colin and say, order this. And I'd bought those records too, would play it to them, and he'd order some in. And at the same time, when I was interstate, like Tony from Central Station Adelaide's like, oh, what's all these people talking about this music you played last night? What was it? And I'd play him some stuff and take down some orders and go back to Colin and go, oh, Tony wants 50 copies of this, 100 copies of that, 20 copies of that. And we just dominated that era at MDS because I think we had the advantage of myself and people involved that were playing the music. Like Colin had Vicious Vinyl, obviously, with John Corse and Andy Van, 2 famous DJs. Andy Van went on to become Madison Avenue, and John Corse still DJs today. And they had Vicious Vinyl at the time, and Ollie Olsen was doing Psy Harmonics, and we were distributing that. I had a great relationship with Bruce and Ollie and Andrew Till. And it was just, at the time, most of the really high-quality Australian labels we were distributing across Australia and exporting. And because I was sort of DJing around the country, I was networking a lot with shops, and there were stores. If they weren't dealing with MDS, I would say, hey, you've got to buy records from us. All the stuff I'm playing, we have. And we just... our main competitors were Colossal and Shock and MDS. We just had a massive repertoire of independent labels. We had Underworld. We signed Junior Boys Own the label, so we picked up on Underworld for many albums before they went to a major. And, you know, this major, V2, signed them for the world for 3 albums except Australia, because we had it. And then through FFR, London Records, we were doing Orbital and CJ Bolin and The Advent. And then through Instinct, we had Moby and Tommy Boy, we had De La Soul, and we had the KLF, and there was just so much of the big Portishead through the FFR London deal as well as Orbital. So we had XL Recording, so we had the Prodigy, Basement Jacks. Like, it was just, you know, we'd got onto that early between Colin and myself. We'd literally snapped up all the independent labels that weren't majors, and even the major labels, like with Polygram, for example, you know, they had Portishead, they had Orbital, they had all this great label run by Pete Tong, FFRR, and they just didn't know what to do with it. So we basically did this service for them where we imported a lot of that stuff, a lot of that underground music for the majors until it got to a certain level. Then we'd hand it over to them. So we were doing, you know, back then, even Chemical Brothers early days, Orbital stuff, like I said, Prodigy, etc. And so we literally, if you looked at all of the music from sort of 1990 to 1992, 93 of dance music, independent and major, we were doing like 70% of it. So it was a great time to be at MDS and at Mushroom. Willie Tell worked with me there. There was, quite a few sort of DJs. Matt Knight was working there. Quite a few Melbourne famous DJs went through MDS under my wing, which was under Collins ultimately. And it was just, it was a really happening time, and literally of the dance music of that era, MDS did most of it. It's quite amazing.
From running the dance department at MDS to running gigs at places like the Palace and all over Melbourne, you then graduate to running events at arenas. In fact, Rod Laver would become your spiritual dance home for many, many years, and it was called by the locals Rod Raver, in fact.
Yeah.
Talk me through just the graduation process from running gigs around town to getting to Rod Laver.
Yeah, well, I started running hardware. The first was in 1991 at the Mercantile Rowing Club, and it was for my dad's charity that he was working for called Tri Youth and Community Services. And after a couple of years of that, I met Tracy Wall, who at the time was producing the big gay dance parties called Red Raw and Winter Days, which were a massive part of Melbourne's culture. You had the rat parties at the Horden in Sydney around Mardi Gras, and you had Red Raw and Winter Days down here in Melbourne. And we took a shared lease, Tri Youth and the Also Foundation took a shared lease on Shed 14 from sort of 90, I think it was the end of 92, around till about 98, 97, 98. And, we put in not sprinklers, but like fire hose taps and exit signs and fixed it all up. And that was a real kind of explosion period. There was, hardware, we were doing our thing and doing 4,000 or 5,000 people. Every Picture Tells a Story was running in Melbourne. You had big events like Happy Valley and things running in Sydney and Strawberry Fields in Brisbane, and it was really starting to sort of grow. And as the scene sort of grew, my interest, I guess, in business grew, and basically, the touring started. I knew promoters around the country from DJing, so I'd say, hey, that music that you like that I play, there's one of my favourite acts, Cosmic Baby, coming, and we'd got him a gig in Adelaide with the promoter Paul Hodder I played with in Adelaide. Got him a gig in Perth with Jeremy Junk I used to play with in Perth, and got him a gig in Sydney and a gig in Brisbane, and we started touring, bringing DJs in. So in that period of sort of 92 to 95, the shows went from 1,000 people to 2,000 to 5,000, and we went from just us playing locals to bringing in DJs, and all of a sudden you've got Laura Garnier and Oliver Lieb and Cosmic Baby and Hard Floor and Richie Horton and Ian Pooley and Thomas Schumacher and these sorts of people coming through. And then the numbers just grew. It just grew and grew, and I was inspired by a concert promoter who I'm working with now and have over the years called Michael Koppel. There was the three Michaels that were the rock promoters that dominated the Australian concert business. There was Michael Chugg, there was Michael Gudinski at Frontier, who owned Mushroom, and there was Michael Koppel. And out of the three of them, like obviously I'd worked for Michael at MDS, at Mushroom. Michael Gudinski, yep. Didn't have that much to do with him. And I had this connection with Michael Koppel more so because he was touring acts that I loved, like Faithless and like Massive Attack and Stereo MCs and acts like that. So there was this connection musically that I had with Koppel because I found he was also doing Jamiroquai. He was, to me, the most experimental of the three Michaels and was doing more sort of that dance kind of realm, more acts that were at the more commercial end of what I was into. So I basically, through a promoter friend, we were thinking about doing a festival other than just, dance party or concert or whatever. And basically we started planning this thing called Apollo. And it was Michael Koppel and a company called Gemco and Hardware, and we came together to put this festival on in 98. And, the Big Day Out was a festival that was a huge influence to me.
And I think it's fair to say too that the Big Day Out had started in 91 and had embraced the boiler room, whereby dance music was part of that culture. And I think the rise of the boiler room and certainly the rise of dance culture with what you were doing was all a huge force, was all connected.
Yeah, definitely. Like the boiler room for me was a huge influence, and it got the acts that I tried to get that I just didn't have the status with the agent, so they never really took me seriously. They just thought I was a rave kid. So I was offering on Underworld and everything else. And even though I knew bloody Rob Holden, Orbital's manager, I just couldn't freaking book Orbital. And I'm like, Rob, it's me. I used to do your records. Like, there was a bunch of dance acts. There was all the rock and roll stuff, and then there was dance acts, the dance acts on the festivals. It was Moloko, like Massive Attack, Chemical Brothers, Orbital, Underworld, Prodigy. It was all those larger, Daft Punk came along in the late 90s. And they were the festival stalwarts. They were if you were booking a dance lineup, you had to have one or two of those, and they were doing Creamfields and Trouble Gathering and Lollapalooza and all these sorts of things. And Ken and Vivian sort of managed to corner those with the Boiler Room at Big Day Out.
Big Day Out
from Big Day Out. Yep, managed to corner those acts and basically got the acts that I wanted to get, and had I remember the first Prodigy single, What Evil Lurks, on XL Recordings. Like we were distributing that and bringing that in through MDS. So We sort of bought the Prodigy through that label to Australia, and I couldn't get them to play my gigs, which was disappointing, but at least I got to see them at Big Day Out. And they were instrumental, I think, to part of Big Day Out's explosion was the rise of the Prodigy with that crossover to that alternative scene, that punk sort of alternative scene. But yeah, it just sort of all grew at the same time, you know.
And you mentioned Apollo. Big Day Out took a year off in 1998, and that was your chance to hook up with Michael Koppel and create a dance festival as such.
It was great. It was ahead of its time. We'd booked Daft Punk before they were big, when the record Defunct came out, and Basement Jaxx and, Jimmy Somerville, Adiva, Frankie Knuckles, Speedy J, Jeff Mills, Juno Reactor. It was a very... for the lineup that it was at the time, it was very upfront, and it was basically, other than the Boiler Room and Big Day Out, it was the first kind of national festival. We only did Melbourne and Sydney, but there wasn't like a touring festival in dance music at that stage. And I wanted to do it again, but it wasn't my decision because I didn't fund it, and it lost money, and the investors decided, not to go around a second time. Which was pretty disappointing. But at the same time, I was doing hardware events down at Shed 14, down at the Docklands, and Future had got in there and were doing trade and a few things down at Sheds 2 and 4. And the Docklands was a bit disjointed because there was already packets of land being sort of assigned to agents and development plans and things like that. And we double booked Shed 14 on the March weekend, and I was like, that's not fair. I've done the March weekend for the last 5 years. Like, this is my shed. What's going on? And we basically were forced to work together. And they said, well, there's a get out clause in your agreement. If you can't work it out, then you won't have, neither of you will do the show. So work it out. So we did, and me and Jason and Mark started talking, and so we did 2 Tribes, and then that was the start of that, and that ended up over the years going around the country and winning awards, the Dance Music Awards, the DMAs for Best National Festival a couple of years, and it just sort of grew and grew and ran for 8 or 9 years. And due to musical differences, like we had differences in I guess where we wanted the festivals to go musically and that sort of thing, we parted ways, and they went and turned that in 2006 or 7, 5 maybe or 6, they turned that into Future Music Festival and continued with those dates, and I had to start something new, and at the time was working with a little bit with Draw Erez at the Prince Band Room, and Frank from FCD. There was 3 partners in One Love. It was Peter Raff, Frank and Draw. Frank from Studio FCD, who was the One Love partner, used to do artwork for us at MDS and did the artwork for Apollo Festival. And was in the visual side. And Peter Raff, who's the third partner of One Love, was, when I was a bussy at Chasers, was one of the 3 sort of promotions managers there, and was the quintessential promoter that I aspired to be. Him and Gavin Campbell from Razor were probably, to me, 2 of the greatest Melbourne club promoters in the historical sense that ever lived in Melbourne. And so I knew those 3, and they had One Love, which was running at the time, was an incredibly successful club brand, running at the Prince and was running in Sydney. And I said, hey, my relationship's turned to shit with Future, and I want to do this new thing, and I actually think this November-December period's a better period. At the start of the summer, are you guys interested? And after toing and froing, we decided to launch Stereosonic.
Which I understand you had to double mortgage your house because the first Stereosonic cost between $600,000 and $700,000. True?
I actually had to sell my jet skis and everything because I'd lost a lot of money after, was it 2 Tribes? No, Welcome 2001. I lost a lot of money. And Michael Koppel's got this saying, you're never a promoter until you've lost your house, basically.
Okay.
It's
did you almost
saying,
lose your house?
I did. Yeah, I did. I lost the equivalent of it basically overnight after 2001 actually, and then literally had to ring Greg First from Beat Magazine and every sort of supplier that I had and said, look, I've been taken to the bath here. Like, don't put me out of business. I'm good for it. And all the other shows, it was just an unlucky show, like all the other shows were always, and the people could see that I was growing and I knew what I was doing and everything was going well. So they kind of backed me in and said, look, that's fine. If next time you do a show, I'd pay a little bit off that old bill and then pay that show up front, and then just sort of, chipped away at it over a year and a half, 2 years. And eventually paid it off. Like this day and age, promoters just, and it's happened over the years, just turn around and walk away from the bills and go and sort of start up another company the next day, and they can. But, I don't believe in that. If someone's done the job, you've got to pay them, like that's just how it is. So, managed to get through that. And, it was tough sometimes. It was.
You
Sold my
established...
studio.
You sold your studio.
Had to sell my two, my 909, my 808, my SH101, my two TB303s, my Jupiter 8. Had to literally sell my studio, which I sold the whole thing for like 12 grand, and today's rates would be worth 100. Basically, it's insane. But I just had to. I didn't have the money, and, creditors were knocking.
In 2009, Stereosonic expanded from Melbourne to Brisbane, Perth, Sydney and Adelaide. In 2011, your Sydney Showgrounds event drew a crowd of 70,000 people, and it still stands as the largest single-day festival in Australian history.
Yes.
In 2012, the event sold over 200,000 tickets nationwide.
Yes.
Yeah. Remarkable.
Yeah, it was big. It was a bit of luck, craftiness with the budget, getting the acts for the right prices and choosing the right acts. But, when LMFAO just came out and did something on that, one of those TV shows, The Voice or one of those things, and they came out and did that, and it was a massive episode, and there was 2 million viewers, and their single then went massive the next week, and we'd had them on the lineup, so it was great promotion for us. So it was a combination of many stars aligning, but we had the recent, the deceased Avicii, which we had from early days, and Van Buren. It was the lineup was just perfect. It was the peak of dance music. Electronic music had exploded in the US through David Guetta and the Kelly Rowland song "When Love Takes Over," which took America, which was a sleeping giant with dance music. It was really underground, like. Back in the 90s, DJs like Jeff Mills and Derek Carter and these big American DJs were getting more work in Europe and outside of America because dance music, America was such a rock and roll and country and Western dominated country. And it went absolutely ballistic. And when we hit those numbers with Stereosonic, it was at that time when everything had sort of peaked and it was just mainstream.
When Stereosonic was at its peak, how did life change for you personally?
It was all kind of the same. It was just on a bigger scale. For me, it was exactly the same.
Yeah.
1,000 people event and a 20,000 people event. It's the same kind of model at the end of the day. It's just more people and more risk and that sort of thing. So it didn't really change that much other than it just became big business.
Well, in 2015, your company faced a wave of legal troubles. There was the parent company bankruptcy, and it was 2 tragic young deaths at Stereosonic. So was that a really challenging time for you?
Yeah, so I left after a year and a half. I was supposed to go to America and be the head of the live department for SFX, and that didn't actually end up working out. Yeah, so about 2014, I left, and so the company was being run by my previous partners, and Frank had left as well. So it was Raf and Simon and Draw that were left sort of running the last couple of years. But yeah, the sale was, it was obviously great for us because we got a good price and everything. And we believed in the whole working with, the other brands and the other businesses that they'd bought. And they bought some fantastic businesses and some great people. But it was very disjointed and it ended up falling apart, losing money, didn't work out, badly managed, I think is the word I'll probably use. And yeah, it went bankrupt. And that was tough because something that you'd built up and, when you sell it to someone, and I wasn't involved in the last couple of years, including when the deaths were, it's hard to sort of sit on the sidelines and see all that sort of going on. It's your baby, something that you've created from the very beginning and been a part of. That was really difficult. The deaths, obviously, it's a sad thing, and it continues to happen in Australia. And I think, drugs are a real issue globally, across a really wide spectrum of age, and they're so freely available, and all these new things that are made, and all this sort of stuff that, unfortunately, Australia is really behind. I think we've got like it's bad, stay away from it type sort of attitude in the way it's policed at events and things. I don't think we have a very proactive way of dealing with it in the country.
Do you agree with pill testing at festivals?
I do. I'm sort of on the leaning towards it more than not. I do understand. I've spoken to some medical people and I understand the risks with pill testing. If something is positive and it's literally, it says that this pill's okay, it doesn't mean that brand's okay. I do think it will give people, in a way, like if misinterpreted what the readings are, it's just about that particular thing, that particular pill has been tested, that's it. It's not saying that all the other pink ones out there are okay. I believe in it. I think it's definitely a no-brainer, but I think it's all around the messaging, and I wouldn't be saying anything is okay, that this pill is okay. It's not. The messaging has to be that this one's poison, this one's poison, this one's poison. And when you go to like Awakenings, for example, in Amsterdam, which is around October, around the Amsterdam Dance Event, which is a conference that I go to every year and have been for almost 15 years, they don't say this is okay. They've got warnings up there of the things that are bad. Mm-hmm. So I think it has a role to play in the strategy, but it's not the only thing. The education process, and I think the decriminalisation of some things and the legalisation of some things and the control mechanisms of some things will provide a safer solution. But it's all bad at the end of the day. So, it's not good. But, you know, Australia is behind, you know, compared to Europe and everywhere else, we're behind in that whole approach.
How did you find working with the Victorian government in making dance events safer?
Yeah, we developed this code of conduct for running safe events with the Department of Health and Victoria Police, and it was a working group. It was Jason from Future, Spiro from Earthcore at the time, myself, and it was kind of to a point where there was, you know, these new drugs and issues coming up, and we needed an approach. We needed an approach to deal with it, but also, like you talked about before, the growth of the scene, and me from doing, you know, 300 people in a club to 20,000, 50,000, it became big business and, you know, like going to a football game type thing. And also with the gentrification of Melbourne and residents moving closer and closer into the docklands and into the city, and apartments popping up everywhere, all those locations that were disused warehouses and where a lot of these underground things used to happen, you couldn't do them anymore because of the noise regulations and things. So it all became, you know, the regulation of, you know, creating an accord, like the guidelines with the government for how to run these events, also came with, you know, the music regulations with the EPA, and a lot of things you couldn't go overnight anymore down at Docklands and things. So all of a sudden, all these day events sort of started popping up. Like Two Tribes went from a night format down at, you know, Sheds 2 and 4 from 10 p.m. till 7 in the morning to going to Melbourne Park to Rod Laver Arena and Margaret Court and out the back and all that sort of stuff, you know, from 12 till 10 p.m. because they were the EPA regulations. So, a lot of that sort of, you know, the permit process and all the legal requirements, you know, stepped up. And the government stepped up too. I mean, the user pays wasn't around. The big day I used to do 40, 50,000 people with only 4 police there, like, you know, in Melbourne.
That sounds insane.
But there would be 150 police at a 40,000 people football game at the MCG, or, you know. So a lot of the politics around policing was around the approved things like the Boxing Day test and the Grand Prix and the cricket and the footy, and music events were just left to just deal with it themselves. So it just, that 10-year period, it went from an underground, unregulated scenario to a highly regulated, over-regulated, you know, scenario.
Last year, Hardware celebrated its 30th anniversary.
Yep.
Did you ever envisage, when you just started out as that promoter that just loved dance and electronic music, that 30 years later you'd be celebrating a brand you created in a genre that you really helped, I guess, expand in Australia in a really big way?
Well, no, not really. No. When I left university and didn't finish to go and work full-time for MDS when the opportunity presented itself, like, my mum was kind of disappointed but supportive of it, but I had no idea that I'd be still doing this like 30 years later. But at the same time, I haven't really, it's in my sort of DNA. I haven't really felt like doing kind of anything else. You know, it's what, it triggers something inside of me. Like if I'm in a bad mood, I can put a certain record on and everything's okay. It's just that driving force. You know, I feel like if we didn't have music in our lives, we'd all be depressed. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like a soundtrack to, it's like everyone's got a soundtrack to their life based on the music that they like and the mood that it puts them in and that sort of thing. And it's always been a part of my life. Like, gets me ready to go out, gets me ready before a football game. When I was a young kid, used to listen to the Sex Pistols or the Exploited and get all aggressive and angry before my under-15s games for Bulleen Templestowe. So in that kind of sense, like it's just always been there and always been the driving underlying force, I think.
What's been the most challenging scenario you've faced as a promoter and how did you overcome it?
Probably the competitiveness in the 90s. So basically I overcame people trying to smear my campaigns by going out in my car with friends and smearing their campaign. So putting my posters
Sounds like dirty
over
tricks tactics.
Yeah, like rolling my sleeves up like it was physical, you know, at one point. Like, you know, there were like fights and there was a lot of money spent in, you know, going over each other's posters. And I mean, the printers and the poster guys were making a fortune.
Poster wars in Melbourne.
Poster wars went on for years, yeah. That was a real sort of challenge. And then, yeah, a couple of times, like I lost kind of everything. And that was, you know, when you're in that position and, you know, you're getting legal letters in the mail and people are calling you, you're taking 20 calls a day, like it just gets you down and annoys the hell out of you when people are chasing money off you. That's a horrible thing. That was really tough. I've met some amazing people and made some lifelong friends from just going out to raves and events and meeting people on the dance floor to people in the industry. And I've met a lot of shit people as well. Yeah, like it's been, you know, there's been some pretty horrible situations that I've been in where I've had to make some pretty big decisions from a business point of view and literally start over like I did with Stereosonic, just literally started over again from scratch. And there was our second year of Stereosonic where, you know, my competitors put a big, massive festival from the UK over exactly the same time period when we had only done one show in Melbourne first year and we were trying to expand second year. They tried to put out a dampener on our expansion plans, which we beat them back into the ground and our numbers are really successful and they lost a lot of money and didn't do that again. But if they were successful, I probably wouldn't be sitting here now. That would have been probably the last, probably the last straw, I guess, because I've been through a few of those scenarios, but we were successful and in the end sold the business and did incredibly well and still here.
Well, Richie, in 2014, you sell Stereosonic for $90 million to SFX, which is a US company. And correct me if I'm wrong, it turns out to be one of the biggest buyouts for a festival in Australia ever.
I think so, yeah. I mean, there hasn't been that many buyouts, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it's still the biggest one. It was pretty amazing. It was life-changing.
How?
Well, obviously, to, you know, work that hard for so many years and to be rewarded with, you know, such a big win, you know, like set myself and the other four partners up for life, basically, to a point where we probably, you know, we don't have to work again if we don't want to. I tried that for 16 months and I got bored shitless and, you know, came back. The music just pulled me back.
You strike me as a person that can't sit still for very long.
Oh, you can only play so much golf and trade shares and download music from Beatport and record all your vinyl to, you know, WAV files and stuff, and then you run out of things to do.
Well, as someone who can't stand still for too long, you're back with Festival X now and you are celebrating with an event in November with Calvin Harris headlining. Yeah.
So I had a break for 14 months and then reignited my hardware company. So we've been doing Pure with Carl Cox and Eric Powell. And then, yeah, through hardware we do Picnic, which runs over summer at the My Music Bowl. And we launched an event called Babylon. and yeah, just continue to do events around Australia. And my lifelong goal, well, not my lifelong goal, but I guess one of the goals that hit me on the head a few years ago was to launch another festival in the realm of sort of Stereosonic, but a new chapter. So myself and Live Nation, which is Michael Koppel, it's all come full circle, who I worked with my very first festival and now working with my current festival. And we launched Festival X in 2019 and had a couple of years off with COVID, and we're back in this year, at the end of the year in 2022, and looking to take it to Adelaide and Perth and be a truly national popular music festival. So it's a bit different from Stereosonic. We're involving sort of urban hip hop as well in the lineup, and it's I guess it's just an adapting to what's the trends and what what young people are into. So we've got Calvin Harris and Megan Thee Stallion and Don Toliver and a flurry of amazing, well-known and first time to Australia, like cutting-edge new acts. We try and get that mix right, and it's very exciting.
How do you keep up with trends and news in your industry? How does these trends inform your work? Because you mentioned a lot of these artists haven't been to Australia before.
It's a very collaborative approach. Like, One Love's office and Live Nation's office and my office, we sort of put our heads together. We have a small committee of 6 of us on a WhatsApp group that are listening to music, and because I do all the booking, all the contracts and the offers and things, like one channel it all through me, but basically we've got a team, and it's input from them and it's input from myself and the staff that work for us as well, and a bit of research online through different programs and things that give you stats and feedback from our own database of fans. So software that we use tells us, what they're listening to and things like that. It's very Big Brother, some of that stuff that goes on out there in cyberspace, as everybody knows. Feedback from the street and just listening to people. Like, I'll always ask, when I'm at an event, like I was at one Marlow in Sydney that we did for 15,000 people a couple of weekends ago, and I'll ask when I'm walking around if, some people look at me and think maybe I'm an undercover policeman because I'm a bit older and I've got my cap on. They look at me strange, but then they see that I've got like my badge on that says that I'm a promoter and part of the team. And sometimes people just wander up to you and, well, I'm eating a hot dog, like having a dinner break. And they're, what do you do? And I talk to them and sort of get inside their heads and ask them how they find out about it and who do they like on the lineup and what do you think of this and that, and just listen to them. And that's what's a great thing about social media is the feedback on the comments. It was funny because like the contact us at Festival X email address, like I monitor that with somebody else, but I monitor that. And the partner's like, you should, you're the director, you shouldn't be wasting your time on that stuff. I said, you know what, I like actually seeing it because the complaints come in on that and the feedback comes in on that. And it's good to get that feedback and actually see it for what it is, than have a staff member or people sort of like keep it from you or floss it up and tell you, like it changes, the actual truth changes that goes along the chain. So I like to monitor that first sort of port of contact and just sort of see what people are saying. So we're a very feedback-driven organisation as well, like from a talent booking point of view, but also how we, pricing and where we do the event and how it runs and things.
What is left for you to do?
We've launched a management company, myself and one of my partners, Kyle Hand, called Atom Management. So I'm really kind of getting into that as a bit of an unfinished business type thing on my list. And listen, there's some really exciting Australian electronic artists that we manage. Taglo, which is a progressive artist from Brisbane, and Laura King is another one that she's from Geelong, girl from Geelong who's doing a lot of great techno, and April Carey, who's from Byron Bay, who's now moved down to Melbourne. So that's a bit of a personal project and one that I've always been a bit of fire inside me kind of thinking to do it, which has been a combination of just a bit of an urge, but also like a lot of people saying, you should do it. You've got all the contacts up, in the record business and managers and agents and producers to remix. So there's that. And I've always wanted to open a pizza shop, actually, because I really enjoyed working that pizza shop for 2 years, and I do love pizza. So I've always thought about, I love food, so I've always thought about opening a restaurant, pizza shop at one point. But that's, yeah, I mean, that's about it, I think.
What's the biggest misconception about you?
Rude. I'm just quiet if I don't know people. I don't know, actually. Yeah, probably that. Bit standoffish. I don't like, for someone that's a promoter, I don't like big groups.
And considering all the accomplishments, how would you like to be remembered?
Trailblazer. I think that's, yeah.
Well, Richie McNeill, there's no argument you are a trailblazer, and it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you here at the Australian Music Vault today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks.